Hello, my name's Alex, and this is going to be a demonstration video of an Advent 300, our standard pressure sensitive labeler, with a optional AFS registration feature, which is a foot pedal registration. We've received two container sizes. One's quart and one's a gallon with molded handles, and we're going to go ahead and go through the machine. We already have it set up. We don't want to have the video too long, so we're just going to go ahead and show how it works with these smaller quart containers. You can see we've already put a lot of labels on here, and the concept is when it's in registration. Well, first of all, let me just show you how the machine works. So normally in Advent 300 you would turn on, you would insert a container, the rollers are already moving, and it feeds a single label on. And you can see there it feeds it on very nicely, very accurately. It has adjustable rollers that allow us to accommodate these ridges or this recessed panel area. Looks fantastic, but it's just going to put the label anywhere along the circumference of the container. And you could go very fast, probably up to 25 to 26 containers per minute. And you can see it's very, very accurate, within a 1/16 of an inch. So that's very straightforward. But if you need to register the label, in this case we're registering the label to this handle, we could put it in mode 2. And what mode 2 does is it turns the labeler into an intermittent labeler, meaning that it will not turn on the rollers until you hit the foot pedal. So that allows the operator to line up a reference mark on the container. What we're using is this handle right here, and we're lining it up to the overhead pressure arm, which is a standard feature on the Advent 300. It allows unfilled or light containers to spin consistently. Once you have it lined up, you have a locking timer on the front of the machine, and this locking timer allows you to adjust the delay of when the label will go on. So you could put that label anywhere along the circumference of the bottle by adjusting that locking timer. So right now I'm going to hit the foot pedal. When I hit the foot pedal, that label should go on in a very specific spot. Okay, so as you can see there, and what I'll do, I think what we were trying to do is just to have it, we got white labels so we don't know how it's going to line up. So in this case, to prove that it works perfectly, we're just going to line it up to the same reference point, and then the label should be on within about a 1/16 of an inch. And as you can see here, well, I was a little off, 1/8 of an inch. And it's going to be as accurate as you line up that reference mark to the overhead pressure arm, and we taper it into a little bit of a point, so you can generally be within about 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and do that again. And you can see I was much better on lining it up. It's right on top within about a 1/16 of an inch. So that is the registration, and of course you could adjust it. So if you wanted it, the panel to go somewhere else, you certainly could. I'm going to go ahead and do this final container. Again, you would insert, line it up, hit the foot pedal, and then you're right on. Okay, same area. Now, of course, the neat thing is if you don't have a full wrap label, let's say you have two labels, and you have to do a front back, what you could do is you could just line up the opposite mold mark, and then you should be able to do a back label. Obviously these labels are too long, but it would be 180 degrees opposite. And we could figure that out. That's the seam there, and that's the other seam. So you can see it's perfectly about 180 degrees apart. One there, right there. Okay, so we did the small containers, very, very straightforward. Now we're going to show an adjustment, a changeover. So the machine comes on this cart, so it's easy to wheel it around and get around it. We have a rewind system here which pulls up all the waste material. It's a very nice feature on an Advent machine. It's spring-loaded. If you're doing a mid-roll change, I always recommend keeping some of your backing paper, because that means you lose less labels when you feed that same roll of labels in. Okay. And then you just pull off the waste material. Throw that away. Okay, so we go to the back. We release the brake arm spring. That's what keeps tension on the roll of labels and only allows one label to be fed on. So you can see it's moving because this white strap, which is the brake arm strap, is released when you release that overhead pressure arm. I'm going to pop the rewind system in. It's just spring-loaded, like a roll of toilet paper. It has an adjustable clutch, which is a really nice feature. So you could compensate for the wear on the clutch and allow the machine to pull the waste material consistently. To pull out the roll of labels, very easy. You just flex the roll, the wings, and it pops out. Okay, so we have our roll of labels. Now I might have to stop the video here because your roll of labels got compressed. You can see it's not a circle anymore. So I might have to struggle here to push it on. So I'm going to take a pause and try to get this onto the mandrel. Okay, with another pair of hands, we managed to get this roll of labels on this mandrel. It's very important that the mandrel, that the core bite into these clips on the mandrel so it moves as one piece. That's very important. If it slips, you're going to have to add some tape or labels onto the inside of that fiber core, and it does happen occasionally. Not all 3-inch cores are exactly the same. Just putting on the guides. It's not as important on wider labels, but just to show you. Then you just flex it out, and you just locate the two holes. Make sure that the white strap's not pinched, and then we're just going to remove this label and feed the machine. Okay, so it goes underneath this brake arm. Okay, goes forward. I just moved some of these white webbing guides because we were working with a narrower label. Pull it through, so it's going underneath that idler, but above that matte black roller. Let me peel off some labels. That goes back to that helpful hint of if you're doing a mid-roll change, keep some of your keep a little bit of a leader so you don't lose as many labels. It's nice to make a little point right here. We're going to pop off the peel bar. The peel bar is where the label gets separated. It has Teflon tape. Never remove the Teflon tape. It's very important. You put the labels over it, and then you put the peel bar back into place. And the sharp edge should be facing up and towards the white tires. And then what makes it really easy, you just turn on the machine. I'm in mode 1. You just put it between those two black rollers, those two matte black rollers. And you'll see when I hit the trigger, it feeds the labels automatically towards the back of the machine. So we just go ahead and pull. This is a good time to kind of help straighten it out. On your rewind, definitely find the slit and wrap it around twice. And the common mistake here is people will forget to reattach the brake arm spring, so what happens is you'll start having labels fed out. So make sure you reattach the brake arm spring. That's what allows the brake arm system to work and to only feed one label onto the container. Okay, so again, I'll go into mode 1 because I want to feed out a couple labels to get everything straightened out. So you can see, that's one label, two labels. And I'll probably do it one more time just to make sure it's straight as possible. Okay. And let me demonstrate an important feature. Right now we have a timer on set for 6. And what the timer does is it affects the pre-feed of the label. At 0, you can see it doesn't feed any of the label out. What we're looking for is a label where enough of it's flagged to the spinning container. And this is probably ideal, about 25%, because we want the spinning motion of the label or the container to pull and stretch that label on. So, and you want it to see consistent. So that's the same amount each and every time. So that's nice and consistent. So we know that the brake arm's working correctly, that the roll of labels isn't slipping. And all we need to do now is adjust for the container. All right, so I'll move my web guides in. Just want them close. And then we're going to adjust for our container. All right, so I move the guides. The product guides are just very simple. They're just thumb locks left and right. Move the overhead pressure arm out of the way. And of course, we're dealing with a recessed panel area. So the first thing I want to do is I want to side it to the backing material. I think that's going to be kind of centered right there. I'll move that guide in. And you can see right now that the rollers have been compressed in a little bit too much. And the rule of thumb is to match the rollers to the width of your label. As long as you do that, you'll know that the containers or the label is always going to go on really nicely. So on these rear support white tires, they have set screws, and we can slide them out and get a little bit of better separation, because these rear white tires help press the label onto the container. And it doesn't have to be exact. I'm just spreading them out a little bit. What I like to do towards the end or the edges of the label is to give myself some margin, because if I have to move the container left or right to avoid those ridges, I have about 1/4 of an inch to work with. Okay, so we did the rear, and what we do to the rear, we should do to the front. On the front, you just take your Allen wrench tool that comes with the machine, and I'm just going to move this white tire back into place. Okay. That should be good. They're kind of matching. And then the final adjustment is we need to adjust for the diameter. Obviously, we were working with a much smaller diameter. So with the carriage knob, we could accommodate containers anywhere from 1 inch to about 12 inches in diameter. The rule of thumb is that you just want it hovering over the peel bar. It's kind of hard to show in the video, but usually about 1/4 of an inch. If it's too far away from that peel bar, the leading edge of the label gets folded over. If it's too close, what happens is that the backing material usually falls or gets wrapped around the surface of the container. So just around 1/4 of an inch. So we got the diameter set correctly. You can see right there, looks really good. Now we need to adjust the overhead pressure arm because we have a big gap, and that would fall down too far and we wouldn't be able to get it in consistently. So we loosen up the middle arm, and then the stop falls down. And I'm just going to set a little bit of about 1/8 of an inch. And of course you can move the arm left and right too. And then I'm going to just move this guide out a little bit. And we're all set. So the overhead pressure arm doesn't fall down, so I can just get the container in and out. Doesn't slow you down. So right now I'm going to do mode 1 just to see where the label goes on, where it's centered, and how it looks. And you can see, single label only. I'll stop the machine. Did a really nice job. Not perfectly centered. You can see I'm a little bit towards the high side. So usually what I do is I keep the container in there, and I just move the container the amount that I want that label to move down. Make sure it's still clearing, the ridges are clearing, they're not being interfered. And that's a really standout feature on the Advent. Because we are able to move these rollers left and right, we could work with recessed panel areas. A lot of containers don't, our machines have solid rollers and you're not able to accommodate those recessed panels. So I'm just going to insert. You can see that label moved down. Okay, maybe just a tad more. So I'm just going to move it up. So again, it's just a simple thumb lock. So it's a quick and easy adjustment. Turn on the machine. And there we go. Works really well. Do one more. Okay. So that we have that. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is going to set it up for the registration. Now I do notice that, interestingly enough, that label was beginning to move a little bit to the left. So I'll have to investigate that. We only have 3 containers. So I'm going to reset the labels over to the left and right. Sometimes containers have like a slight hidden taper. So I'm going to feed out a couple labels. And I'm going to try to get this reset. You can see the labels moved back into position. And I'm going to move that guide and I'm going to play a little bit tighter just because I want to see if the labels are moving left or right. Generally, they'll begin to track to one direction if the containers do have a taper to them. Usually these don't, so just want to keep an eye out on that. Ideally, you figure those things out as you're working with the samples for the first time. So I want to make sure that the container is nice and even. So a good way of testing that is just to put it in 0 for the timer and just make sure that it's moving evenly. This container does have a wobble, but I do notice that it does like to track. And maybe my mistake is I wasn't keeping my hand on the top, thinking that it wasn't tracking out. So probably the problem was I didn't have this up against the guide. And that means when you insert, just gotta have your right hand up against the spout and just keep it up against that guide. Okay, so that's all set. I'm going to go into mode 2 and we are going to line up that reference point. Keep my hand up against that top of the container and hit the foot pedal. Oh. Now I didn't feed a label because my timer isn't set. So we need to get that label flagged out. So that should be about 3. And again, line it up to the reference point, then hit the foot pedal. Okay, and you can see that's perfect. So again, it was my mistake. I just didn't keep my hand up against the top, pressing up against that guide. All right, so we'll see the repeatability of this. Okay, line it up, hit the foot pedal. And yep, it's about within 1/4 of an inch. You can see, I think we had a little bit of a pre-feed on the first label. You can see it's excellently registered. So the center line of the label would be right on that handle. So when it's on the shelf, the handle's facing the customer and then the middle of the label will be right there on the handle. Of course, you could adjust it if your panel's a little bit to the left or to the right. We could certainly do that. And I only have 1 container left, so I'm just going to go ahead and do this one. Okay, line it up. Hit the foot pedal. Again, you can see right perfectly centered on that mold mark. Again, I will line it up. Feed. Okay. And you can see, looks good. Now you do notice that we have some wrinkling here, and that's just because these are white plain labels. They don't have any print. They're a little bit on the thin side, and on these containers there could be definitely some soft spots. Generally what we like to do would be to put an encapsulating spring on the overhead pressure arm. Usually we do that with the finished labels, but we could certainly take that out with printed labels with either a laminate or a varnish on them. So let me go ahead and put these two containers. Oops. And you can see the handles are perfect, the labels are perfectly registered to the handles, and they look fantastic. So that is the Advent 300 with the foot pedal registration. As far as maintenance is concerned, you just want to keep the rollers as clean as possible. You can also notice that the label's tracking perfectly left to right. It's not moving because I had it off. So any questions, we can reach at 800-846-7716. Thank you very much.